Our lives are as personal and at the same time public as the things that we wear. And today I want to give you both a history of sewing and the machine, which you can see there's many of them around the room today, that changed the world, actually. To reconnect with the articles that we've done day after day, I hope that we can learn a little bit about fabric, industry, women, history, and technology. Today I hope I can adequately touch on all those points so that when you slip on that t-shirt, you'll understand why you're not lacing yourself into a corset instead. Up here is our first visual. In 1982, a few miles from Cape Canaveral in Florida, a bog, later named the Windover site, was discovered by archaeologists. Windover was a burial site for the ancient people who lived near there. Within the bog, very well preserved, were many bodies, and with them artifacts that were buried with them. Among those artifacts, in fact what wrapped up those artifacts, is one of the most fascinating finds, and that is burial shrouds, fabric. Natural plant fibers in complex designs were discovered. These required a loom and were very complex design. In the picture here, you can kind of see, it's kind of blown up, so it's a little bit difficult, but you can kind of see that intricate weaving that they would have done. This archaeological find is a wonderful place to start our story of sewing, because even ancient peoples producing and developing technology were producing and developing technologies to make the textiles that they needed for everyday life. This textile was dated by some of the archaeologists and scientists to be about 7,000 to 8,000 years old. It makes it the earliest piece of fabric ever found in the Americas. So, very, very cool site. We can't talk about the history of sewing without intricately weaving it in with the fabric we needed to sew together. The availability, expense, and type of fabric directly impacted the fashions that we see in the past. Fabric for many centuries has been a precious commodity. The Jan van Eyck painting that we see here of the Arnolfini portrait shows how fabric was used to display their vast wealth. This green dress that swathed around the woman would have been probably worth the amount of what a small sports car is worth today. Thousands and thousands of dollars. Because of the expense of fabric and the labor that it took to make it, most people wore basically simple clothes. Finer fabrics were saved for special occasions and for small details and trims. Basic clothes cut from simple rectangles to reduce wastage were commonly worn, and shaping was achieved by belting. So you can see here, this is kind of a pre-medieval example of a reproduction of clothing. Basic, simple, rectangular styles, and belting achieved any shaping that they wanted to make on that one. As technology and commerce developed, fabrics of all types became more accessible and less expensive, and we start to see changes in fashion that reflect that. A movement from simple rectangular shapes to more fitted kirtles. A kirtle would be this kind of overdress that you see here in blue. And hose, which would be what you would, like a pantyhose or like a sock that you would put on the bias, started in the medieval period. Curves and cuts that accentuate the body, and coupled with body-shaping garments such as corsets, bodies, or stays are developing during this period. And here we can see how they have moved on from those simple rectangles and are starting to achieve more shaping and make things look prettier and really kind of accentuate certain things and get into some fashion. As history marches on, let's move into the Renaissance period. The fuller skirts and large puff sleeves, and with the slashes, you can kind of see the slashes there, and multiple petticoats were all the rage. And of course we have Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth. They were the icons of fashion in the Renaissance period. And this photograph, or this picture, shows all of the corsetry, they even put them on small children, and the full skirts that they would wear that also showed off their wealth. Yes?
How did they get, I mean, I know how corsets work to get your body nice and trim looking, but how did they get the skirts to flare out like that? Did they have some petticoat underneath?
Bum pads and petticoats, rolled bum pads, which were essentially like a pillow that you would tie around your waist and that made it stick out. As history marches on, and the New World starts producing a well-known but previously very expensive fiber called cotton, I'm sure you've all heard of that one, and the East India Trading Company was hauling interesting and new products all over the world to trade and sell. Fashion and fabric changed again. Cotton was becoming more accessible, and block printing techniques from India combined to create calico prints. The comparable inexpense of this fabric allowed the wide hoop skirts and bustles that characterized the 19th century to become very popular. This is an image of a tintype. Again, tintypes didn't give us great details, but you can see that her dress is block printed. That would have probably been a cotton fabric that she has on her dress, and they would take blocks that had almost like a stamp on it and stamp the fabric to create that pattern. Whereas before that wasn't really an available thing and became extremely popular because it was fairly inexpensive. Yes?
I'm going to have a lot of questions.
Okay.
Because I'm not a sewer, I know nothing about fabric. But how did they get cotton? What is cotton from? I have no idea.
Cotton is from the cotton plant. It's an actual plant that grew, and it likes hot, kind of wettish, climate. So it was originally grown in Egypt, and there wasn't really a ton of space in Egypt to grow that specific plant, so it was fairly rare and expensive for a lot of years. Well, then the American South was discovered in 16-ish hundreds, and then they started growing and producing cotton there. And then of course with slavery making it cheap to be able to harvest and spin the cotton, and then later the cotton gin, which was able to mechanicalize that process, made the fabrics even cheaper. And then they discovered this block printing technique from India and started using that to make these inexpensive calico prints. Calico itself is just a type of weaving the way you weave cotton fabric, but the calico print is what really kind of was iconic in that 1850s, 1860s kind of look. If you've ever read Little House on the Prairie, which I'm sure a few of you have, Laura and Mary would always have their little pink and blue calico dresses. So, did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
I just never associated the two together, believe it or not.
No, that's fine. So despite these changes in fashion, types of fabrics and colors, not much has really changed in how those clothes were put together. From bone and stone to iron and steel, the thread and needle changed very minimally. Most importantly, the people who did the labor with the tools of the needle and thread didn't change much in these centuries either. They are, in a word, women. The clothing store, off the rack, and ready-made clothes is still a relatively new invention. For most of human history, your clothes were made by somebody or someone very close to you in your community, be it your mother, your wife, your sister, or a local dressmaker. Women were the clothes makers for the family, and sewing was as integral to home life as cooking, because for most of human history, clothes making was done at home. The making of clothes was a slow and constant process for women. How many times do we see painted in story or in art or in history the picture of an idyllic home and the woman is busily sewing? Even the wealthiest, most prestigious women still showed their value through the beautiful sewing work that they could accomplish. Sewing was so entwined into daily life that to not understand how to do that skill would have been completely unthinkable. This picture of a painting that was done probably right around 1900 is called Young Mother Sewing, and you can tell that it's a very idyllic picture. You have a very lovely woman, and she's busily sewing, dutifully doing her job, and her young child is watching her. And we also have an example here of what wealthy young women would have been making in their free time to show off their skills and the beautiful stitchery that they could do. They would make these samplers, and some of the girls that would sew these types of samplers could have been as young as 7, 8, 9 years old. They got started on that very, very young. Here, over here, and I've talked to a few of you about this, we have some examples of home-sewn clothes or hand-sewn clothes. Clothes like these would have been sewn in the home and would have taken hours. They have no original machine stitching in them, at least that I can find. And these clothes were worn by everyday people. This linen shift came from the Netherlands by Agnes Kloosterman, and the shift is an article of men's clothing. It would have been used as a night shirt, possibly an undershirt, and the shift itself is not terribly old. It was brought over in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but it is a pattern off of a very ancient type of style. And it proves that changes in fashion and style was constant, but very slow. And a piece like this proves that the basics stuck around for quite a while. You can tell that because we have our basic squares and rectangle shapes. And they also put a gusset under the arm, which reduced wear in that area, because that would have been kind of a pinch point or almost like a pull point, and would have ruined the nightshirt over time. So that gusset was put in to help relieve that tightness there. Here we have a black silk bodice. I don't really want to lift it up, but later we can take a look at it a little bit more closely. It's a little bit delicate. And it was worn by Mrs. Roloff Smith and gifted to the Historical Society by her great-great-granddaughter, Agnes Walters. The style indicates its time about 1850s to 1860s, and if you notice the shaping on it, it's very body conscious. This piece was fitted to the woman herself, and only a woman who would be wearing a corset. And you can tell that because it's just such a fitted piece and has and is very, very tiny as well. And then we have our blue wool dress here as well. And again, the time is about 1860s. Extreme shaping in the bodice and a very, very full skirt. A corset and multiple petticoats would have been worn with this dress to achieve its desired shape. And you can also notice the wear and the fading. This dress was used, and even though the fabric and fashion was more available to the common person, clothes were still quite a large expense and were used and reused until the bitter end. In fact, articles of clothing like this are rather difficult to find due to the practice of using fabric and reusing it until it was mere rags. This dress may have had even other stylings before it was left in this particular state. It might have been worked or reworked to follow the fashions of the day. Then we are going to talk about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution started in the 1760s, excuse me. Industry and factories started producing cheap products, and work pulled men off of the land for the first time. As men, women, and children toiled in factories producing furniture, home goods, tools, and even the fabric, sewing was not something that could really be industrialized for a long time. No machine could produce a reliable stitch in the same way as human hands. Before the sewing machine came to the factory, ready-to-wear clothing was still available. It was relatively inexpensive as well too, and impoverished women would work the tedious job of sewing cheap suits and shirts for working men. The women were paid very little for their time, only being able to complete about 6 to 9 shirts a week. And the women were paid by the piece and earning at the time and place, depending on time and place, anywhere from 5 to 12 cents a shirt. In today's money, that works out to about $35 a week. So imagine sewing all day long and earning $35 a week for your labors. many people tried to create a sewing machine, and several prototypes and patents were developed to build a machine that could stitch. None of these machines were able to truly take off in industry for a long time. Many of the machines were inconsistent with how long they could sew before adjustments and resetup of the machine would have to take place. One machine that showed a lot of promise in the industry was produced by Bartholomew Themenère, and that's French, so hopefully I didn't completely butcher his name. He developed it in Paris in 1830. But unfortunately, it fell victim to an angry mob of tailors who thought his machine was going to take away jobs from tailors. They set fire to the factory that housed his 80 machines that he had produced, and they were used to make military uniforms. The machines were destroyed, and the sewing machine had to wait a few more decades to become the familiar household appliance that we know today. John Fisher later, in 1844, filed a patent for a sewing machine. His sewing machine, while imperfect, solved a lot of the problems with moving parts. However, a botched job at the patent office resulted in Fisher never receiving recognition for his sewing machine. I looked high and low to find a visual of his sewing machine, and I think because of the botched patent job, that doesn't exist. We don't know what his machine really looked like. Or at least it's so rare that I wasn't even able to find it. Even Google couldn't bring it up for me. So, let's see here. But later, Elias Howe filed a patent for his sewing machine in 1846. His machine was the first practical sewing machine. And this machine uses thread from two different sources, a spool and a bobbin. This is the basic design that all modern sewing machines still use. So here is his drawing, and this is a rebuilt example of what his machine would have looked like. And there is Elias Howe. And actually, in the museum in Zeeland, we actually have a later model of Elias Howe's machine because he later had some other designs. In 1851, Isaac Singer introduced his sewing machine. It used the same mechanisms as Howe's machine. And Singer introduced his machine, or Singer's machine is probably the most iconic. It's what we envision when we think of sewing machines. You can see this is his first original design. It's looking a lot more familiar to what we know nowadays for what a sewing machine is. Elias Howe brought a lawsuit against Singer and won for patent infringement. Ironically though, if not for the patent office's ineptitude, Howe could have ended up a defendant in that lawsuit because the mechanisms that he used copied John Fisher's, and he would have been in patent infringement for that as well too. By the 1860s, many articles of ready-to-wear clothing became available due to the sewing machine being used in industry. Even some women's clothing, or at least parts of them, hoops for skirts, cloaks, hats, and some other outerwear were beginning to become ready-made. When the sewing machine was introduced to industry, it did not improve women's conditions, but simply made their unskilled labor more efficient and their productivity increased substantially. Pay was still meager, and now instead of working in their homes, they were away in a factory. The Industrial Revolution doesn't have a great track record for health and safety of the workers that it employed. And sewing, however, would be a change in the safety regulations. It instituted a change in the safety regulations that were approached. This is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1911. Some of you probably know the story. Hundreds of women, locked in a building filled with fabric and fibers, caught fire. Unable to get out due to the locked doors that kept women from sneaking breaks or stealing, meant that 146 people, 123 women and girls, and 23 men died in that fire. The public was outraged, and insurance companies saw that these conditions meant higher payouts for the insured. This led to legislation requiring improved factory safety regulations and helped spur the growth of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which fought for better working conditions for sweatshop workers. So here you can see what it would have looked like when it was going on. You can see all those sewing machines and all the fabrics and the clothes that they're producing, and the aftermath of the fire afterwards was just devastating.
Would those have been treadle machines then?
Yes, those would have been treadle machines. They probably would not have had an electric in there as of yet. So
What year was that?
that would be 1911 when the fire happened. So the Triangle Shirtwaist Company was around before then, but the fire happened in 1911. So even during the Industrial Revolution, clothes that most people wore would still be made at home. Women until about the mid-1800s would still be working by hand to keep up with the sewing and clothing needs of her family. Despite the labor of keeping up with sewing work, the home sewing machine was still a hard sell. Machines were expensive, they required intricate machining work to produce, but to solve those problems, the sewing machine companies created something called the sewing machine combination, or the sewing machine trust. It solved the problems of patent fees and machining intricate parts. By pooling the patents, the companies could reduce those fees and focus on machine development instead of litigation, and the parts became interchangeable. Of the 9 patents that were pooled, 3 were particularly crucial: the lock stitch, the 4-motion feed, and the combination of the vertical needle with the horizontal sewing surface. If you look back, there's no horizontal sewing surface. This machine here sewed on a tiny little, almost like a rod. But when we move on, we see a horizontal sewing surface to sew on. And that's what we all see on all of our home machines around us today. Now sewing machine manufacturers can enter a whole new market of buyers, the home sewer. To market the new labor-saving devices to an at-home sewer, the machine manufacturers had to find their market. Although poor piecework at-home seamstresses might be an obvious choice, that demographic could not afford it. The middle class, who could afford the machines, was their next target. Setting up fancy showrooms, and you can see here that was a very beautiful old showroom for Singer sewing machines with fancy displays in the window. Machines were encased in beautiful cabinetry with lovely carrying cases. We have some examples of some of the beautiful carrying cases that they would have used. The middle class women, they enticed the middle class women to purchase her own machine. A lease-to-own plan by Singer propelled his machines forward in sales, and the promise of labor saving and less time toiling over the family's sewing machine needs, or sewing needs, the sewing machine rocketed in sales. As the home sewing machine gained popularity, it was more affordable to more people. It allowed fashion, especially for women, to come off the fashion plate and into the homes of people with many levels of income. Wealthy women could always afford custom clothes that were at the height of fashion, but now middle-class women and working-class women could copy the fashions of the day. Patterns were also becoming available to purchase. Ladies' magazines would print patterns in their magazine for women to purchase, and in 1860s, the first tissue paper patterns were produced by Ebenezer Butterick. That is quite a name.
Yeah.
And a few years later, James McCall began to print patterns as well. And today, these brands are still some of the biggest names in the industry. The labor-saving promises of the sewing machine, however, were quickly outstripped by the fussy and time-consuming fashions of the day. Ruffles, gathers, pleats, and puffs were ubiquitous to Victorian fashion. And most women were wearing them because the sewing machine allowed her to make those frills herself, all with the help of the continuing new technologies of the sewing machine. The 20th century saw war, massive technological advancements, changes in politics and policy for women, and of course, fashion as well. Coming along for the ride through all that is the home sewing machine. The early 1900s shed a lot of the fussy Victorian flair, and what the Victorians birthed in new technology, the new century would mature. Electricity, telephones, automobiles, all these things started to take shape in the late 1800s, but were now being refined and improved by the new century. The sewing machine was not immune to this surge of improvement, and fashion changed right along with the machine that made it. In front of us today, we have about 120 years sampling of sewing history, and I want to walk you through a little bit of that history. Over here, so I'll kind of have to wander around the room a little bit, we have the Singer Model 27. This is an unrestored treadle machine. This machine would only sew straight seams, had no back stitch, excuse me, and no tension release. Despite the limitations of this machine, the clothes that came off of them were remarkable, proving the talent and skill of the home sewist at the time. Some of the clothes that may have very well come off a machine similar to this, or maybe even one just like this, would have been this guy here. This is a black bodice and skirt, and our plaid dress over here that's laying down. I kind of have her put in the machine because I thought that looked kind of cute. The style of the clothes indicates the time period to be about late 1800s, early 1900s. The long seams and hems are all done on machine, with more intricate work was done by hand. Buttonholes, seam finishes, and other fine work was not yet possible on these machines. Over here we have, kind of moving into the Edwardian era, early 1900s. We have a black bodice and skirt, and let's see here. Here we go. And with a lace insert and lace sleeves. The black dress is mostly machine sewn, and underneath is an extremely heavy petticoat. And I know it's heavy because I put this on the mannequin, and man, that was kind of a trick to get it on. If you have a chance, you can kind of lift it up later and just feel how very heavy it is. It's full of cording and ruffles to hold the skirt out. Let's see here. The sheer weight of that petticoat would have meant that the woman wearing it would have had to have a corset. The corset was a supportive garment, but also assisted in taking the weight of many skirts and petticoats. And the petticoat would have given this dress its desired shape, that kind of flared out shape. The purple bodice and skirt that we see here is about the same era as the dress, perhaps a little earlier. It's all machine sewn in as well, and has lovely intricate buttonholes and puff sleeves. And then laying down on the table back there, and after I'm done here, you can kind of go take a look at it and really admire that one in its full beauty. That piece has so many ruffles and frills, it is difficult to know what goes where when a person is wearing it. The piece is so remarkable because it showcases the excesses that the home sewist could go to with her machine. That piece is machine made as well and has plenty of hand stitch details. It is a great example of the sewing machine's labor-saving qualities being usurped by fashion's demands. And if we can turn kind of all the way around, I should have had rotating chairs or something for you guys. But you can walk around later. We have the Singer Model 99. This was an electric machine. This particular one was made in 1928. And if this particular machine had a knee press, so that's how you would make the machine work. You didn't have a foot pedal. Our dress over here is also from the 20s. And it could be silk. It also could be rayon, which was kind of a imitation silk of the day. The drop waist, you can see that it drops down below the natural waist. And the loose style gives it a time period of sometime in the 1920s. Again, it is fully machine sewn and could have come off of any treadle or maybe early electric sewing machine. Even in the 1920s, not everybody had electricity, and even if you did, you might not have traded your treadle in yet for electric. However, the drive to put electric into homes was due not just to electric lighting, but also because of the new electric sewing machines that were coming out. We have to turn back around again. And we're going to take a quick look here. I'll point out the Singer Model 15K. Now, these also, let's see, where did it go? Here it is. These also are all labeled, so you can take a look at them later. It was produced from 1930 to 1957, and this model was made in 1949. It was electrical, and it was called the farmer's wife due to the ability to sew through heavy fabrics. It was very popular with women who needed to do lots of heavy-duty mending and sewing for her husband. Over here we have these sweet little dresses, which I just adore. I'll hold them up so you can kind of see them and you can take a look at them later. These little children's dresses are just so cute. I wish I had little kids to dress them in. They're a lovely example of dresses most likely sewn in the 1930s era. And they are made of fine cotton and also machine stitched. They have hand stitched embroidery, which you can kind of see there. And these kind of dresses are some of my favorite because they exemplify the work that mothers would be doing. They're well sewn, but very imperfect. And I think we can all relate as a busy mom to just getting it through the machine and get it done for Easter Sunday morning. But the love and care that was put into them is so evident, especially through that embroidery. And that is what a homemade piece is all about, putting your love into something just for somebody else to wear for themselves. Over here, we have the Singer Class Model 201. And this is perhaps one of the finest machines that Singer ever made. It is called the dressmaker machine. It does not have a zigzag stitch, but a beautiful straight stitch. And so in the past, some machines would have an angled stitch. Each stitch would be on a slight angle. This one produces an exactly perfectly straight stitch. And it was designed that way to make fine, beautiful dressmaking clothes. Really, really beautiful. It was an investment for a home sewist to purchase one of these, but it was quite a value. And this machine was designed for that very perfect dressmaking work. Produced in the into the 1960s, this machine was extremely popular. And this particular machine was made in 1950. You can see that on the tag there too. This one is my favorite little guy. It is a Model 201 and it's called the Featherweight. And you can tell why it's called the Featherweight because the thing is very, very light. It's portable, could be put away, and had a table specially made for the machine. And I will show you what that looks like here. That is the table. The Singer Company's greatest success in the early 20th century was that featherweight. More technically named Model 221, the featherweight once again awed the world with its innovation. This model was made out of cast aluminum instead of heavy cast steel previously used, and weighed only 11 pounds. Its biggest selling point that it was highly portable. Singer made a special table that could house the machine, so you would pop that up and put the machine in there. And then the machine could be taken out, the table could be used for other activities, but the table could also be folded. You can see that they have this one folded down. And then also put away, so you could, it was a highly portable machine. And bonus points for just how cute it was, like, it's adorable. If you can call a machine cute. I don't know if you're allowed to do that.
But a foot pedal to it, or was it?
It does have a foot pedal, I believe. Yes, it does. Yep. So most of the machines that I'll show you from now on do have a foot pedal. Occasionally you'll come across one that doesn't, but what I have, the rest of here all has a foot pedal. These machines are still highly sought after even today, the 221. But the 221 has a sister machine, and it is called the 222. It was called the Queen of of sewing machines, and its claim to fame was that it was everything that the 221 was, but it sported a free arm. So you can see here, this plate came off, and you would just have this section here. All the rest of the machines before that had that solid flat bed that you couldn't remove. And anyone who's had to put in a sleeve hem or a pants hem knows the value of a three-arm machine. And then, let's see here, we have our faff back here, so we're going to turn around one more time. In conjunction with our farmer's wife, we have another little workhorse of a machine, the Faff 130. It was a flatbed, so no free arm on this one. It was produced in the 1930s to the 1960s. It's a clean and simple machine, much less decorative than some of the other machines that are here. And it was very heavy duty, again, with all metal parts, a very popular little machine. After World War II, Singer noticed a need for a new kind of machine. And for its 100th anniversary, Singer would produce the machine of tomorrow. This new style of home machine has a concealed motor, a new stitch formation called a lock stitch, which before things were just kind of a looped stitch, but the lock stitch actually pulls the stitch up into the fabric fibers and locks it into place. And it has that concealed motor, and it receives its name of slant shank because of the slanted needle and presser bar. And that slant allows for better visibility at that stitching point. The machine was designed with home economics in mind, and Singer wanted to produce a machine that every girl in high school would use in her home ec class, thereby raising an entire generation of the home sewist on this Singer brand. The Rocketeer, which came a little bit after that, that one was made in 1959. The Rocketeer here, this one was in 1963. It's housed in a cabinet, but it is also portable. And it was removable, so you could take the machine out of the cabinet and move it around. And it was designed during the height of America's space craze, with a full complement of futuristic lines and accentuated by the brown and gold. This retro sci-fi styled machine is aptly named the Rocketeer. The last of all metal machines that Singer made, and marks a turning point for Singer. Subsequent models employed a variety of cost-cutting measures, including the introduction of plastic gears. So the Rocketeer is considered one of the last of the greats. It has a lightweight aluminum chassis. The top cover flips up to reveal two spring-loaded spool holders. It has an internal bobbin winder, and the clamshell top actually has a tendency to flip open when the machine is tilted, and it's not the sturdiest of construction. So a lot of examples that you'll see of this machine will be missing its clamshell. So it's kind of neat that we have one that still has its clamshell on the top. It's technically called the 501A. And it is double needle capable, but still uses a single upper tensioner, which is right here, that's your tensioner, and one bobbin thread. It also has a zigzag stitch and decorative stitches built in. Its cousin, the 5013, uses special discs to produce its decorative stitches, but that one has it all built in. The Rocketeer uses a unique quick change needle plate that raises for darning, as opposed to other machines that lower the feed dogs. This makes it going from a straight stitch to a zigzag, a snap, and one reason why the Rocketeer has a very high quality straight stitch. In that same era, the 50s and 60s, we have some examples of some clothing. We have our burgundy colored, or kind of brownish colored, burgundy wool suit. And we also have our dotted Swiss 1960s formal. These two pieces were both made sometime in the mid-century. The Rocketeer could have been their maker. And they both feature zippers, a fastener that machines had to make new styles of presser feet for. The blue dress is definitely a homemade garment. which is quite normal for those very sweet mid-century formals. I just love those. And the suit does not have a tag, but it is a very, very nice example of 1950s to 1960s smart attire. And zippers themselves were kind of a small revolution in how we dress. In 1916, a hookless fastener was advertised, but it took a few more years of tweaking and adjustments to come up with the zipper that we know and love today. In 1923, B.F. Goodrich first used a zipper on galoshes. And zippers were primarily used on boots and shoes and tobacco pouches. But they started being used in children's clothing because the advertisers were advertising the zipper on the children's clothing to promote independence and ease of dressing for your child. Zippers were quick to install, they made the closure of your garment clean and neat, and they were easy to put on and wear. So now zippers are the most popular clothing fastener of the time. There's almost nothing that uses not a zipper to close if it has that kind of back enclosure like on a dress or a gown. Over here we have the Kenmore 117-470 flatbed. This one was made in 1956. This is a really fun machine. It was made by Pfaff in West Germany in partnership with the White Company for Kenmore. There will be a quiz at the end. Who produced this machine? This machine has a zigzag stitch, and to own a machine with a zigzag stitch is comparable in today to owning like a serger. A zigzag stitch would revolutionize your sewing capabilities. Stretch or knit fabrics along with elastics were starting to become available and popular. To sew these fabrics, a stitch was needed that was adjustable and flexible. And that is what the zigzag stitch gave to the sewist. Stretch fabrics changed the way we wear our clothes. Wovens have only given us so much give on the bias. A stretch fabric can give its wearer a beautiful fit without restrictions. And it can give us comfort that was unknown before in our clothes. Clothes that had to be fastened with buttons, as you can see all the dozens of buttons that are on these clothing here, had to be buttoned with or closed with hooks and eyes. Now slipping into that pair of pants with an elastic waist or a stretch t-shirt was easy, comfortable, and neat. It revolutionized underwear as well. No more stiff corsets or bulky combinations. Now elastic and stretch material made what was under your clothes a lot less stiff affair. Clothes became lighter, easier to wear, easier to dress in, and cheaper because of this new technology. The hand-sewn nightshirts and undershirts were now the stretch tee. No more corsets and petticoats to hold the shape of your clothes. Stretch fabrics gave you the desired fit and shape without all the underlying pieces. And that brings us to our next machine. The Kenmore 158, 1914, which this one is actually my machine that I still use to this day. The first stretch fabric was made in 1958, and this machine came out in the 1970s to allow home sewers the technology to sew more efficiently the new stretch fabrics of the day. I still use this very machine on modern stretch fabrics. Its adjustability, free arm, and cams for decorative stitches gives the user the capabilities to flawlessly sew all these tricky fabrics. And if any of you have ever tried to sew some of the new knits and tricky, slippery, stretchy things that are around today, you will know that you need some finesse to do that. Our mint green flocked formal is an example of all of this. The green dress is a perfect example of what a Kenmore like this could produce. It's stretch fabric, and it just screams, I am from the 70s. Without the zigzag, a dress like this would be very difficult to produce and might not even exist as we see it here. It shows how wonderfully textile innovation and the sewing machine innovation combined to create clothes that made the 70s just what they were. For good or for bad, whatever you want to say. The Bernina this is the Bernina 801. I have a visual of the Bernina 730 over here, which I'll show you. The Bernina 730 is smooth and quiet and Swiss made. It boasted a new patented knee-activated presser foot. So this one does have the knee-activated presser foot, so that will bring our presser foot up and down. And it came with cams to sew embroidery stitches and was very fast at about 1,000 stitches per minute. I've sewn on a machine similar to this one, and it is very fast. You can really whip through some long curtain fabric, because I've done that. The 801, which is the Bernina back there, has an automatic buttonholer. So if you look at all of these, those buttonholes would have all been done by hand, and now we can do that on our machines. And it is probably one of the nicest buttonhole machines that I've ever used, so I really like that one. These Berninas are machines that I still use today, and I have my children sew on them. They are reliable, they are simple to use, and these machines show us that a good, high-quality machine doesn't have to be brand new or expensive. These machines can be purchased for a few $100s online and can serve you well for a lifetime. Sewing has been with us for thousands of years. Technology and innovation has changed what we sew with, how we create, and what we sew. The past few decades have been a rough time for sewing though. What was once a skill that everyone had in some capacity is now a specialty. We have removed ourselves from the clothes that we wear. We rely on stores and designers to tell us what to wear and how to wear it. And we no longer know what fibers our clothes are made from or how they were made. The history of the things that we put on our bodies day after day is being lost. But not all is hopeless. In the past several years, a resurgence of interest in sewing has occurred. It is small and it is niche, but it is very strong. The same interest in knowing where our food comes from and what ingredients are in the products that we use every day is the same interest that people have in learning how to sew. People who just a few years ago would have never looked at a sewing machine are picking up used ones at the thrift store and trying their hand. Requests for sewing lessons, online tutorials, YouTube videos, even podcasts about sewing are all surging in popularity. All right. I'm missing. Here we go. Last one. Perhaps the 2007 recession started putting us into more of a make, do, and mend mentality. Perhaps the culture is shifting. Perhaps politics have made us interested in gaining new skills and sustainability. But whatever the reason, fostering and teaching this skill should be something that is highly encouraged. The accomplishment felt after completing a piece that you can physically put on and parade around is second to none. Not to mention the environmental and economical benefits of having made a garment right in your home. The garment didn't have to travel to get to you, wastage is less, and the money you spend on the garment stays local. The history of sewing is rich, scandalous, long, and vast, and I'm looking forward to the 21st century adding to that history. Hopefully, in a few hundred years, somebody will look back at us and see what we did with our sewing skills and technology and marvel at where our innovations brought them. So hopefully that taught you some things. Thank you very much. So yeah, if any of you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. You may feel free to roam around, look at some things, ask some questions, and enjoy yourself. So yes, thank you.